So good evening and welcome to the University of Notre Dame, Australia. It's wonderful to have you with us tonight for tonight's public lecture, AI and the Good Life. My name is Professor David Bronstein, and I'm the director of the Institute for Ethics and Society here at Notre Dame. It's my pleasure to be your MC this evening. Tonight we are delighted to welcome the following guests to our campus. U.S. Consul General, Mr. Jeremy Cornforth, the Most Reverend Bishop Richard Umbers, Auxiliary Bishop of Sydney, University Director Mr. Jack de Groot, Vice Chancellor and President-elect of the Templeton World Charity Foundation, Professor Francis Campbell, and our keynote speaker this evening, Professor Megan Sullivan, the Wellesley Family College Professor of Philosophy at the University of Notre Dame in the United States. Now, before we get underway, I kindly ask you to please switch your mobile phones to silent, and in the event of an emergency, please follow the direction of the university event staff. The University of Notre Dame, Australia is proud to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land upon which our university sits. The university acknowledges that the Sydney campus, where we meet tonight, is located on Gadigal country, the Fremantle campus is on Whadjuk country, and the Broome campus on Yawuru country. Now, I would like to invite Donna Ingram to the lectern to deliver the welcome to country.
Good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be here with permission from my elders to offer you welcome to country for tonight's public lecture and reception to launch the University of Notre Dame Centre for Technology and Human Futures. It gives me pride to represent my community in this important cultural protocol. It shows respect for and recognition to the unique position of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australian culture and history. We are gathered on the traditional land of the Gadigal, who are one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation, which is bordered by the Hawkesbury, the Georges and the Nepean rivers. I'm an Aboriginal woman who proudly identifies with the Wiradjuri Nation from central west New South Wales. I was born on Gadigal land and I've had the privilege to live, work and raise my 4 children on this land for most of my life. My family has grown and I'm now a proud grandmother to Aaliyah, Elijah, Kalila, Lakota, Jake Jr., Aki and baby Cade. My wish for my grandchildren is to grow up happy and healthy in a safe and inclusive society where they believe that their dreams can come true. They will grow up with AI technology and will no doubt understand it better than I ever will. I acknowledge the Gadigal, their spirits and ancestors who will always remain with the land Mother Earth, and I thank them for their ongoing custodianship. I pay my respects to our elders both past and present, and we must never forget the sacrifices made by our leaders to create a better future for Aboriginal people. I do this as a reminder and as a tribute to elders and those who have gone before us to fight for land rights, justice and equity for our communities. I extend my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all clans and nations who are present this evening. I also recognise our non-Aboriginal sisters and brothers from all backgrounds who walk beside us to share ideas and knowledge. I now offer you a warm and sincere welcome to the land of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation. Wish you a safe stay on the land and safe travel from the land. On behalf of my community and the Gadigal, I wish you all an enjoyable time at this lecture and congratulate the University of Notre Dame on the launch of the new Centre for Technology and Human Futures that will explore the promises and pitfalls of technology and the social, ethical and human impacts. In closing, we remember that this is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. Thanks everyone, have a beautiful evening.
Thank you, Donna, for that warm welcome. It's now my pleasure to introduce Reverend Dr. Pascal Corby to lead us in the university prayer.
We pray for the guidance and help of our patroness, the Blessed Virgin, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Notre Dame, Mother of Jesus and our Mother, we ask you to guide our university. Mary, as you cared for Jesus, show a loving care for us as we expand our minds in study and research, as we open our hearts to future possibilities and extend our hands to those who are in need. Mary, seat of wisdom, teach us to care for the land and the people of this country of the Southern Cross. In this academic community dedicated to you, help us to find new yet faithful ways of bringing the message of Jesus to Australia and to those who share this region of the earth with us. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father Pascal. It is now my pleasure to welcome Associate Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic and Registrar, Professor Renee Kohler-Ryan, to say a few words. Renee.
Thank you, Professor Bronstein. Distinguished guests, colleagues, students, and friends of the university, welcome, and thank you for being here this evening. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from one of the world's leading philosophers, Professor Megan Sullivan, who will speak about one of the defining issues of our time, AI and the good life. At the same time, we are marking an important milestone for our university, one that reflects careful discernment, sustained collaboration, and hope-filled commitment to the future. This evening, we formally launch the Centre for Technology and Human Futures, the culmination of several years of strategic planning and international engagement, grounded in a shared commitment to excellent research where humanity is in the foreground. The centre is housed in Notre Dame's Institute for Ethics and Society, along with the Centre for the History of Philosophy. This ensures that the centre's work will be continually informed by deep expertise in contemporary moral philosophy and the history of ethics, and that it will take the long view when engaging with technological change, particularly with artificial intelligence. The impact of artificial intelligence in our daily lives is beyond dispute. In universities, we grapple with its challenges every day now as we prepare our graduates for a rapidly changing world. The new centre forms an important component of the university's response to Pope Leo XIV's call at a conference last year at the Vatican for Catholic institutions to lead the way in ensuring our moral frameworks evolve as rapidly as our algorithms. Early last year, the Dicasteries for the Doctrine of the Faith and for Culture and Education published a note, Antiqua et Nova, on the relationship between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. It warns of the risk that we might begin to think of machines as persons, and even as better, more capable, more powerful persons. To the contrary, Gaudium et Spes, which was pronounced several decades ago during the Second Vatican Council, reminds us of something different, that the order of things must be subordinate to the order of persons, and not the other way around. The shift in our collective imaginations when confronted with AI and the challenges that it raises should not be cause for alarm. Instead, we find an opportunity for discernment by focusing on key principles of Catholic social teaching, the dignity of the human person, especially our capacity for free and rational moral choice, and the common good, including our shared responsibility for our common home. Humans have always lived in a world of change. The fullness of our humanity is most apparent in our forms of free, thoughtful, one might even say intelligent, compassionate response. Responding to Pope Leo's call, the Centre for Technology and Human Futures will host humanities-grounded research on AI and emerging technologies, exploring their implications for how we work, teach, play, understand ourselves, and relate to one another and to God. To lead this initiative, we have assembled a team with an outstanding record of research and leadership at the intersection of the sciences and the humanities. For more than a decade, Associate Professor Victoria Lorimer has researched the intersection of religion, spirituality, and technology, including AI, and has published widely in premier outlets, including 2 books with Cambridge University Press. She is the Centre's inaugural director and holds a doctorate in science and religion from the University of Oxford, completed under the supervision of Professor Alistair McGrath, as well as holding formal qualifications in genetics, psychology, and theology. She is joined by Professor Stephen Bullivant, Professorial Research Fellow in Theology and Sociology, a leading scholar of the sociology of religion and atheism, with doctorates from the University of Oxford and from the University of Warwick. Between them, both of these professors currently lead research grants totaling more than $1.2 million in religion, science, and technology, including support from the John Templeton Foundation, and they are currently co-leading a project examining how technology is being used to enhance intellectual, physical, and spiritual well-being. Reverend Professor Eamon Conway, the inaugural Professor of Integral Human Development at Notre Dame, will ensure that the Centre's work remains closely connected to the university's broader priorities, particularly in relation to integral human development and ecological responsibility. This Centre does not mark a new beginning so much as the formalisation of a dialogue we are already engaged in and at times leading. Just last October, for example, staff and students from the university gathered in Rome for the proclamation of St. John Henry Newman as a Doctor of the Church. In the same week, the university co-hosted with the Australian Embassy to the Holy See a panel event entitled Cultivating the Intellect in an Age of AI. Theologians, philosophers, and educational scholars, including the Centre's inaugural director, explored how Newman's vision of education and the university might illuminate the challenges of our digital age. This is precisely the kind of rigorous, interdisciplinary dialogue, deeply rooted in tradition and responsive to contemporary questions, that this Centre will foster. We are also delighted to launch the Centre in partnership with the University of Notre Dame, USA, and its Institute for Ethics and the Common Good, which is home to the IBM Tech Ethics Lab. This collaboration situates our work within a global network of inquiry, ensuring that our local contributions form part of a broader international conversation. It is therefore a particular pleasure to celebrate this launch in the presence of the Institute's Director, Professor Megan Sullivan, whose presence underscores the shared vocation that binds our institutions. To formally establish the Centre, it is now my pleasure to invite to the podium our Vice-Chancellor and President-elect of the Templeton World Charity and the Templeton Religion Trust, Professor Francis Campbell.
Thank you, Renee. And just before I start, I think this is the first official visit of the US Consul General here to the campus. So if we could just give him a very warm round of applause, if you were just to stand up for a moment. Oh, just here. Jeremy, you're very, very welcome. And it is poignant that you're here with us this evening as we also celebrate the link to the University of Notre Dame in the United States, because we were founded as a founding partner. The University of Notre Dame in the United States set this institution up first in Fremantle, then in Broome, and now here in Sydney. So we have a huge debt of gratitude to the Catholic intellectual tradition in the United States, and prior to that in France, from which your mission and apostolate came from. So you're very, very welcome here, and I hope this is the first of many visits. Now, also just to thank Auntie Donna for a wonderful and beautiful welcome to country. Auntie Donna, we don't need to welcome you to the university. You're here with us constantly and a member of our team, and it's always lovely to have you back, and very, very welcome to Auntie Donna. Give Auntie Donna a round of applause as well. And to Father Pascal, thank you very much for the prayer, and to David for emceeing this evening, and also to Renee. and also to welcome one of our former trustees, Bishop Richard Umbers. Bishop Richard, you're always very welcome here at the university, and also one of the board members, the board of directors, Jack de Groot, the executive director of Catholic Education in the Diocese of Parramatta. Jack, you're very welcome back here this evening. Now, what a wonderful opportunity it is, and I should, as Renee says, to declare an interest, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Megan, the Templeton Family Foundations have been very generous to you just before Christmas. I had no role in that. My role starts later in the year, but it is a testament to the work that you are doing in this field, that you received such a substantial grant from the Templeton Foundation, and we congratulate you on that. It is my privilege and pleasure this evening, on the recommendation of both the Academic Council, and we have the chair of the Academic Board here this evening, Professor Aaron Murphy, who is also the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and one of the great drives behind this initiative, and the Senior Management Group, to officially launch this evening the Notre Dame Centre for Technology and Human Futures. I'm delighted that Victoria will lead this initiative. And as Renee has said, I saw firsthand what we did over the course of the weekend in Rome when John Henry Newman was declared the most recent Doctor of the Church. Joined by Father Eamon Conway and Professor Stephen Bullivant, it will be a wonderful centre. And we have every confidence in Vicky's leadership of this centre and look forward to how it will take forward our vision for transformative research that contributes to the common good in the era of artificial intelligence. And I also want to welcome our International Visiting Fellow, Professor Megan Sullivan from the University of Notre Dame. Megan, your partnership in the development of this centre is wonderful, and the latest chapter of a very long and rich history of the relationship, starting back with Father Hepsburg and then successive presidents. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank the University of Notre Dame for your partnership and your encouragement with this centre. I hope that in the future, as this centre grows, that also the support and the encouragement of foundations grow with it. And I'm delighted that your work, Victoria and Stephen's work, is already recognised by the Templeton Foundations. Ladies and gentlemen, I now call on Victoria to step forward and to tell us a little bit more about the centre. And a very, very warm welcome to you this evening. Victoria, congratulations.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. And thank you for establishing the centre and for all the support that you've given to this particular research initiative already. But I also speak on behalf of my colleagues at the Institute for Ethics and Society, just to acknowledge all the ways that you've been championing research across the university. We're so grateful for that, so thank you. I'm sure you've all heard of boiling frog syndrome, which comes from the claim that if you put a frog in a pot of tepid water and you gradually bring it to the boil, it won't jump out and eventually will die. As a metaphor, it invokes the idea that we can fail to recognise the severity of a situation until catastrophe can no longer be avoided. I hear it a lot in the current moment, in response to political change, to climate crises, and to the increasing uptake of AI. So I was very surprised to find out recently that this isn't true. A frog will absolutely jump out of a pot of water that's slowly becoming warmer. You know, they've got a sophisticated capacity for thermoregulation. So stop maligning frogs, said frustrated frog scientists everywhere. But in a more formal rhetorical discourse, we might talk instead of slippery slopes. So a slippery slope argument tends to discourage a particular action on the grounds that it will inevitably lead to certain negative consequences. Allow students to use AI tools to check their grammatical understanding. One day soon, we'll have no universities. I think we can do a lot better than this when it comes to philosophical reflection on AI. Reactions to AI veer from the awestruck to the overhyped to the entirely pessimistic and the fear-driven. And I think to this we could add resignation. These technologies are here to stay, so we may as well get used to them. But despite abundant references to slippery slopes and to boiling frogs in present discourse, nothing about the trajectory of AI and emerging technologies is inevitable, neither the hype nor the anxiety. There are options beyond uncritical embrace and wholesale rejection. But we need resources to discern which AI tools are helpful and for which purposes, which tools are harmful and why. So I'm really excited for the role that the Centre for Technology and Human Futures will have to this end, hosting humanities-grounded research that considers both the promises and the pitfalls of AI and emerging technologies. And our research themes range from philosophical and theological engagement with specific concepts like personhood and flourishing to the kinds of futures that we imagine around these technologies and their social and ethical implications. And while AI is obviously a major focus of a centre that's about technology and the future, our researchers are currently also working on technologies of self-tracking and enhancement, and even on quantum worldviews. And that's just the beginning. And we have rich resources available to us as we do this reflection. So when it comes to technology, for example, Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home highlights the way that new paradigms and forms of power derived from technology are entangled with precarity, with ecological and economic fragility. And the 2025 Dicastery note, Antiqua et Nova, Ancient and New, harkens back specifically to that point in discussing AI. So the note exhorts us, quote, "It is critically important to consider its anthropological and ethical implications. This involves not only mitigating risks and preventing harm, but also ensuring that its applications are used to promote human progress and the common good." And it's been highlighted several times this evening already that this is a shared task. It's one we undertake as part of a global community. So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Megan Sullivan, Wilsey Family College Professor of Philosophy and also Director of the Institute for Ethics and the Common Good at the University of Notre Dame, USA. And as a philosopher, Professor Sullivan could dismantle slippery slope fallacies and other related fallacies in her sleep. She studied philosophy at the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar and did her PhD at Rutgers. She's the author of Time Biases, published by Oxford University Press in 2018, and co-author of The Good Life Method, which is based on the enormously successful God and the Good Life intro philosophy course that she developed at Notre Dame. And Professor Sullivan is currently working on Loving Strangers, her next book on love-based approaches to ethics. And we're really fortunate here at Notre Dame to be halfway through a masterclass that involves a preview of this highly anticipated work, and that's been a lot of fun. So as director, Professor Sullivan leads a university-wide ethics initiative. Her centre also includes the IBM Tech Ethics Lab, and in 2025, following a year-long preparatory phase, Professor Sullivan and her team at the Institute won a $50 million grant from the Lilly Endowment for their project, Delta Network, Faith-Based Ethical Formation for a World of Powerful AI. And they're doing brilliant work in developing the kinds of resources that we need to think skillfully, ethically, and responsibly about AI and emerging technologies, and also in connecting together scholars and community organisations and industry partners worldwide who share that same mission. So it is a real privilege to partner with them in this. So I'm sure we'll hear more about the Delta framework in tonight's lecture. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sullivan to the lectern to deliver her talk on AI and the good life.
Oh my gosh, thank you, everyone. It's so wonderful to be with you tonight as this center is born and to have the opportunity to be welcomed and spend time with the absolutely phenomenal faculty and staff at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. I have no idea why we say it Notre Dame up in the north, but it's so awkward to Notre Dame. But I'm going to do it tonight for you, Vicky. I actually had the opportunity. I've been to Sydney before. I've been looking forward to this trip all year, but I've been to Sydney before. The last time I was here was a decade ago, and it was while I was on my research sabbatical. I spent 6 weeks living in Newtown as I was working on my time biases book. And I haven't said this too much before, but I was desperately homesick when I was here because I felt like so far away. I'd been in Singapore for a month before that. I'd been away for a long time. And I would walk around the city, and I stumbled one day on the gates of the University of Notre Dame, Australia, and saw the symbol of your university is very similar to the symbol of my university. And I would stop and pause and just feel a moment of like at homeness and peace when I was so far away, and felt a sense of being at home at your university then, but nothing compares to the just extremely warm welcome I've received on this visit. And I'm so grateful for the friendship that Notre Dame North has with Notre Dame South. Not only because it enables us to tackle some really important research projects together, but also because for the themes that we're going to pick up this evening, what is our ethical vision for the good life in the era of powerful artificial intelligence? This is a topic that Catholic institutions, the church, and institutions of higher ed are, I think, uniquely poised to lead on. Artificial intelligence is a global phenomenon. It is not at all isolated to any particular region or country. And the Catholic Church is a global church. It's one of the few global institutions that's actually thriving right now. And so I'm very excited about the prospects of Catholic institutions across the globe. And literally, you don't get any further apart on the globe. I saw this on Friday than South Bend, Indiana, and Sydney, Australia, to be able to collaborate and work together on casting a vision for what kind of lives we want to build and what kinds of societies we want to develop now that we have access to this very, very powerful technology. So it's exciting to have these conversations, and I believe that this is just going to be the beginning of a phenomenal partnership, a phenomenal chapter in the partnership between our two universities. I want to spend our time this evening trying to talk about that positive vision. What on earth do Catholic institutions have to say about the era of powerful artificial intelligence? You might think, and it depends on kind of which circles you hang out in, but you might think the church is uniquely not able to talk about something like artificial intelligence because it's old. It's a church of the book. It's a very impersonal or a very personal kind of community. And AI is new. It's going to supplant book learning if some quarters are to be believed. And it's a deeply impersonal phenomenon. I think a lot of people assume that religious communities and religious folks are just desperately afraid of artificial intelligence, and that the advent of artificial intelligence and its ubiquity in our culture is going to be just one more nail in the coffin for the relevance of religious communities. I want to challenge both of those assumptions tonight. I think that people of faith, and in particular Catholic institutions, should really see a tremendous opportunity to take ideas and teachings that have long been the core of their ethical vision and make them relevant to a new question that many people are wrestling with. And I also think that those teachings have never been more relevant outside the church than they are now. I think that Christian communities have a lot to say about artificial intelligence that will be of interest to people of many different backgrounds. When popes publish social encyclicals, they typically address them to people of all goodwill. And we're all anticipating that Pope Leo XIV is going to issue such a teaching about what it means to preserve human dignity in the era of artificial intelligence. It will be addressed to people of all goodwill, and it really will be throwing down the gauntlet, asking us to think what is relevant from this tradition to this vision of the life we want to build. And I hope, I don't know if we're getting ahead of the Pope is going to get us in trouble. I hope he doesn't watch this video. We can project a bit, imagine a bit today of what he might say, because it's my conviction that the church has a whole lot to say about this issue. The late Pope Francis had a refrain. It appears in Laudato Si and some of his later writings. He said that we need a growth in conscience that's proportionate to the growth in technology that we have experienced in our lifetimes. Interestingly, he doesn't say that we should slow down technology. We have to speed up our moral development. So I want us to start off tonight by just thinking a little bit about other instances in recent history when we have had to speed up our consciences to catch up with our technology. And one of the examples that feels really salient to me is 1945. So if you were living in my country, this is probably worldwide, August 6th, 1945, in the United States of America on the East Coast at 10 a.m., you would have heard about a telegram from Harry Truman. And you would have learned two startling pieces of news at once that morning. First, Truman told the country and the world that, unbeknownst to the vast majority of us, an intense scientific race had been occurring for the previous decade, where the United States of America had invested millions of dollars in a race to figure out how to harness the energy of the atom. And they had finally figured out how to do this, to harness one of the most fundamental, primitive physical powers on planet Earth, and had discovered how to unleash that technology. So one of the most important discoveries in physics had been made and had also been learned how to be harnessed to develop new technologies. It was absolutely phenomenal. You guys know what the second announcement was, right? That we had used that power to develop a bomb that is 2,000 times more powerful than any weapon previously known to man, and that we had deployed that weapon on Hiroshima in an effort to end the war. So, first piece of news, startling scientific discovery. Second piece of news, oh my gosh, warfare as we know it on planet Earth has been dramatically changed. Hanson Baldwin was the military editor for the New York Times, and we didn't have the 24-hour news cycle back then, so you couldn't just immediately get tweets from the New York Times, live streaming Truman's announcement. You had to take a day, a beat, to try to process what you had just heard. And Hanson Baldwin in the New York Times wrote on August 7th, 1945, his analysis, and he turned to a passage of Scripture to describe the significance of this double-barreled announcement. He looked to Hosea. A craftsman made this. It is not God. They sow the wind, but they reap the whirlwind. It gives me shivers to think that this was the passage of Scripture that came to mind for him. One, it gives me shivers that there was an era when the New York Times would quote the Bible for a world event. That era is gone. They quote Scripture, and he didn't quote a triumphalist passage of Scripture. This is a passage that's about the golden calf. So the Israelites were upset with their real God, so they made their own God. And of course, we know what happens next. It does not go well for the Israelites. What Baldwin thought when he heard Truman's announcement is, we sow the wind, we might have just won World War II. I mean, that was pretty fantastic news for the United States and for the Western world. But we reap the whirlwind. You don't know what is going to come next from this. And the things that we make, the things that we are capable of creating as humans, they can contain both possibilities. The possibility of great success, of flourishing, but also the possibility of devastating suffering. And that was what Baldwin wanted to put on the radar for the New York Times readers the day after the bombs dropped. In the 20th century, Christians played a very prominent role in many global debates. My presentation will be a bit US-centric, but I'm sure you'll find examples of this from Australia. So in the case of atomic weapons, we had figures like Reinhold Niebuhr, who were advising the president, who were bringing Christian social teaching and just war theory into the conversation about how we should prosecute the Cold War. In the case of the civil rights movement in my country, you had leading figures like Martin Luther King Jr., but also countless pastors from churches that you'll never hear of who harnessed their Christian social teaching to convince a generation of individuals in our country to stand up to racism and to lead what now has been one of the most successful social movements in our country's history. Christians had a seat at the table in many of these 20th century debates. We were largely asleep at the wheel at the dawn of the 21st century and the dawn of the digital revolution. And I don't think there's anyone here that thinks that Christians exercised a very powerful or prophetic voice at the dawn of the internet era. And there are a variety of explanations that we might have for why that happened. One explanation is for many Christian churches, and here I speak specifically to the Catholic Church, the dawn of the 21st century was the peak of the public's reckoning with the church's sexual abuse crisis. So we just didn't have a ton of social capital to spend on any issues at that point. We were still rebuilding trust in our institutions. The technology revolution was led out of a handful of really geographically specific places, Silicon Valley being one of the key entities, where there maybe wasn't a high density of Christians or Christian voices who could participate in those conversations. I think probably the biggest explanation for why Christians were a bit asleep at the wheel in the dawn of the digital era is that everyone was asleep at the wheel at the dawn of the digital era. We really were not asking difficult questions about how the internet and social media would shape our ways of life until it was too late. Hindsight is 20/20, but we just didn't know in 2000 what we were walking into. I think it would be a catastrophe if we slept through the next chapter, the transition from the internet and social media economy to the economy and world order that's governed by the powerful forms of artificial intelligence we now have access to. And there are a few reasons for this. The most obvious one is that the ubiquity of artificial intelligence in our lives right now are causing a lot of people to ask pretty profound questions about what it means to be a human being and what it means to live a good life that they don't have great answers to. You take a second, I don't know if you've experienced this yet, but take a second and ask if you've kind of hit your personal singularity yet. There's a term in the AI literature, the singularity. The general singularity is when AI takes over the world. That's like the Terminator scenario. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. We can talk tonight if there are doomers in the audience about that. I guess I'm pretty optimistic. But there's also the personal singularity. This is the moment when you realize that AI has disrupted something pretty significant in your life. I had my personal singularity in December 2022, so about a month after ChatGPT came out. I was visiting my parents and my brothers, and I was getting ready to teach my God in the Good Life course the coming spring, and I was working on the syllabus, sitting on the couch with my brother, and my brother looks at me and he's like, "You are so naive." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "I have an app on my phone that can write every possible essay in your class right now, instantaneously. Like, your students will never write another philosophy essay again." It's like, "What are you talking about?" And he showed it to me, and I was like, "This is a joke." And I gave it some of the prompts and realized, like, oh my gosh, he's right. Not only could this do every philosophy question that I have spent my teaching career developing, it could write my dissertation in 10 minutes. It took me 6 years and 2 universities to write that dissertation, and this can do it at the drop of a hat. That was my personal singularity of realizing, man, the world does not meet my expectations anymore. So many people are going through this moment right now of having their personal singularity around AI, and it's raising questions for them. How do I parent teenagers who now have access to supercharged forms of highly personal artificial intelligence? What does it mean to get therapy anymore? Do I need to go see a human therapist, or can I get a free product from Google or OpenAI that will talk me through my mental health crisis? These are the moments of personal singularity, and a lot of people don't have great answers, great tools for how to navigate this. In the background of these personal singularities, there's the economic singularity. So the Human-Centered AI Lab at Stanford produces some pretty reliable and phenomenal data about how AI is changing our economy and what it's capable of. One thing that you don't even need my graph to tell you is that in certain corners of the world, my country included, we have made unprecedented investments of our GDP in building these frontier models. My graph runs out in 2023. You couldn't even read it anyway because the font is so small. But by some estimates, in 2025, $1 trillion of our economy got invested in frontier models and their applications. Even if you think we're in an AI bubble, we're in an AI bubble. Like that we've made a humongous economic bet on this technology being revolutionary, no matter what is going to shape the society that we live in. This amount of change happening this quickly calls out for ethics. It calls out for reflection on what exactly we want to do with this technology and what our vision of the good life is that's going to help us navigate these transitions. A year and a half ago, the University of Notre Dame in Indiana partnered with the Lilly Endowment to look into this question: what are Christian groups saying about artificial intelligence? Are they going to kind of sleep through this chapter? Are they starting to have concerns about what's happening? And we conducted 150 one-hour interviews with self-identified Christians from a variety of denominations, evangelicals, Anglicans, Roman Catholic, who either work for big tech companies, work in journalism, work at major research universities, or pastor churches. And we asked them two questions. First, what are you concerned with around AI right now? Like, what are you noticing? What are topics that are coming up in your field of vision? And two, what from your faith tradition do you think is relevant to the work that you need to be doing going forward? We did focus groups across my country. We did one in Silicon Valley, Boston, Washington, D.C., South Bend, Indiana. We did one in Park City, Utah, where there was a large Christian gathering, where we put the pastors together with the technologists and the Catholics together with the evangelicals to see how their ideas would change once they were talking to one another. And a few themes emerged from this project. I'll give you a quick sample of this. I'm happy to share also any of this background information if folks are interested. One, maybe unsurprisingly, powerful AI is forcing people to ask some pretty profound questions about what it means to be a person. So 5 years ago in my philosophy class, if I had assigned my students an essay question, what makes humans distinct from animals, I would have 100% accepted the answer: humans are capable of abstract thought. Humans can make stuff. We're creative. We're capable of solving math problems. Animals can't do that. So that's what it means to be special as a human being. Oh my gosh, personal singularity. Now on my cell phone, I have a piece of commercial software that can do all of those things. It can solve abstract problems faster than I can. It can make things. It can make mostly really bizarre memes and pictures. I used it to make a gift certificate for my colleague's birthday last week, but it can create things that nobody's ever thought of before. It passes that test. Does this mean that the software is now a person? Like nobody except hardcore science fiction fans were really wrestling with that question before ChatGPT hit the mass market. Now it's a question everyone's wrestling with. So that's one theme. Second theme is that movements, quasi-religious movements, are happening in these tech hubs. If you think that Silicon Valley is this kind of completely secular capitalist juggernaut, you just haven't spent time there. There are people in these regions who are very interested in faith questions and who are also very interested in joining new religious movements or forming new religious and ethical organizations. Many of the people who are working in the tech industry are people who had the benefit of tremendous educations where they read books and asked philosophical and theological questions and are not going to suddenly set aside those aspects of their curiosity as they catch the wave of this new economic and technological change. There's a hunger and interest in these topics, and it's actually much more significant than it maybe was 25 years ago at the dawn of the internet. Another thing that we learned from our discussions is that many people are turning to artificial intelligence to satisfy human needs that institutions like the church and their schools are no longer able to adequately satisfy. So I'll give you an example. One of the biggest promises of artificial intelligence right now concerns literacy education, the ability of AI software to teach young children how to read. There are many parents in my country that would prefer that a 4 or 5-year-old learn to read from another human being, ideally human beings who really love and care for them. Teaching someone how to read is one of the most human things you can give to another human. But if your child's kindergarten and first grade is failing after the pandemic, if you've lost teachers and you haven't been able to rehire them, and you're really not able to adequately staff these classrooms to have proper literacy education, the next best thing you can turn to is a product that's being sold and a screen that you can stick a 4, 5, 6-year-old in front of that will offer them this skill. People are turning to AI because the human version of providing that skill has not been succeeding. Likewise, in the case of churches, people who might have been drawn to have a deep discerning conversation with a loving pastor about a marital issue or a mental health issue in the past no longer have those relationships with their local pastors. They don't even know what it is to be a member of the church anymore. But they still have those problems. So if they have the opportunity at 1 a.m. to pull up a character AI that pretends to be God and speaks in the form of the King James Bible and will offer them spiritual advice and that's available 24 hours a day and is basically free, or maybe you need a small subscription to access, they'll do that because they don't know where else to turn. So the AIs are meeting real needs that, frankly, schools and churches have to take seriously where they have fallen short. And then finally, and this is what we heard across the board, some despair that Christian communities were able to stand up to the huge levels of coordination and power that tech companies and political entities have right now in this question. It's clear that if Christian ethical frameworks are going to make any difference in this debate, it's going to require a lot of collaboration and coordination across our denominations. If we think that this is going to be an issue that divides Catholics and Protestants, we're going to get nowhere. The real challenge here is not Catholics versus Protestants or Catholics versus Jewish communities. It's everyone versus the robots. And we've got to find ways of finding enough common ground in this issue to be able to articulate a common vision that doesn't fall into these really nitpicky, divisive traps that are so common in our communities right now. Which gets us to this question, like, okay, what is going to be the ethical strategy for these communities? How do we start to build this? There are two broad approaches to technology ethics right now. I'd be curious if the Australian ethicists agree with this, but kind of my perspective is there are two camps developing, and it's not accelerationists versus doomers, but it's camps about the methodology for how you think about technology ethics. One camp in technology ethics is very focused on rules and safety, and what I might refer to as the ethical floor. So NIST, a large organization in the United States, is probably a key example of this strategy at work. These are ethicists who are focused on how do we build artificial intelligence applications which are safe, explainable, transparent, that don't embed inherent biases in their algorithms. So this camp in ethics is very focused on the capabilities or potential biases or vices of the AIs themselves, and how do we create rules and policies to regulate and constrain the AIs so that they don't exhibit those bad behaviors. I call this the ethical floor because I think we can all agree that we do not want to build unsafe AI. We definitely do not want to release powerful models on the world that will tell people how to build biological weapons, or that will stoke political divisions leading to civil wars and conflicts that could have been avoided if we hadn't deployed those unsafe AIs. I think we can all agree that that should be a fundamental part of AI ethics. The debate is whether that encompasses all of AI ethics or where all of our focus should be, or whether there is room for approaches to AI ethics that are not just narrowly focused on those rules. One of the biggest surprises, I think, in the last few months is that one of the major AI companies has decided it is not going to pursue a rule-based approach to AI ethics, but is instead going to embrace the tradition of virtue ethics. To give you guys a little bit of philosophical reminder, the tradition of virtue ethics says that the heart of ethics is thinking about the essence of what an entity or a community should be, or what it is becoming. What are its virtues? What are the ways that it can flourish? And flourishing doesn't mean just narrowly following a set of rules, but it means having a vision for what something should be. Anthropic, which runs one of the 5 major frontier models in our country, last month put out a constitution for its artificial intelligence, Claude. And if you have not read it yet, you need to go home tonight. It's like 30 pages long, so pour yourself a cup of tea and read it, because I was telling the bishop at the opening tonight, I think that this is going to become a historic document in AI ethics, because it came directly from this company. And it reads like a letter that Anthropic is writing to their AI, basically offering it moral instruction about how to be good in its life. It kind of reads like St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians or the Romans, basically saying, like, here's my advice for how you should grow up and how you should become a mature, flourishing AI. And some of it is completely wacky, but it's very interesting because Anthropic has taken this project very seriously. They use virtue language to talk about what it means to be a great AI. So they want Claude to be honest. They want Claude to be helpful. They talk repeatedly in the Constitution about how you should approach their AI as though it is your most trusted friend. It cares about you, it knows you deeply because you communicate with it and share all of your data with it, and it's going to help guide you and care for you as you navigate all of the different questions that require information and knowledge. One of the biggest questions I have reading, I have so many questions reading Claude's Constitution. I'm going to teach a grad seminar on Claude's Constitution this summer. But one of the biggest questions I have reading this is, oh my gosh, when did we get so focused on AI virtue where we've completely stopped talking about what human virtue looks like in the era of artificial intelligence? And I think this latter question, what does it mean to be a good human in the era of AI? What does it mean to build a good human society? That's a question that Catholic institutions like the University of Notre Dame and University of Notre Dame, Australia, are actually uniquely poised to answer. I strongly believe that this is the question that the Vatican is going to put on our agenda this coming summer. So the second half of this talk, I want to think a little bit about that issue. What advice does the Catholic tradition have for us about how to be virtuous humans now that we have this technology at our disposal? This is the second approach, the virtue ethics approach to technology ethics, and it's the one that our institute really wants to lean into. What I'd like to do, we made a little 3-minute cartoon video explaining the 5 big principles from virtue ethics, which we think come from the Catholic tradition and provide a vision of the good life and the good society in the era of AI. I want to show you guys the quick video. If you like it, you can find it on Google. It was not made by AIs. It was made by human beings. But it'll give you a brief overview. And then I want to just run through the 5, and I'll give you a little bit more depth as to how these 5 principles work. And then I want to open it up for questions and discussions. I think one of the best things that could come out of our time together tonight is collectively starting to have this serious dialogue about what the Catholic world and Christian world might have to offer the rest of the world in these debates about artificial intelligence. First, I'll show you our little video. I think it's the next slide. Yeah, here we go.
The rapid rise of artificial intelligence is causing considerable widespread anxiety. What will the impact be on us and our children? Is the social fabric that holds us together beginning to unravel? Whenever major disruptive changes have occurred throughout history, people of faith have always been there, re-knitting that fabric. We need to ask, what makes a human life worth living? And how is this unique, valuable, and distinct from what technology offers us? At the University of Notre Dame, we've developed the Delta framework to guide these conversations. Dignity. Every person is valuable because they are human, not because of how smart, wealthy, or productive they are. When using AI to increase scale, speed, or efficiency, we need to ask how this affects individuals. Embodiment. We are physical, social, vulnerable people. Our senses help us cherish what we encounter, and mortality makes life precious. Virtual reality can never fully capture lived experience. Love. Loving relationships involve two-way exchanges. Tools like chatbots might simulate companionship, but we need real, messy human connections to flourish. Transcendence. There are many good, beautiful things that we did not create. As we begin to use AI to interpret the world, we need to cultivate our capacity for awe and gratitude. Agency. To live a good life, people need the freedom, focus, and ability to make moral choices. Technology can diminish this potential. We must protect decisions that only a human conscience should make. Join us in this work. You can help the world think differently about AI.
Made totally by humans. We still got it, guys. Let's talk. Here's what I want to do with just our remaining few minutes, and I do want to leave plenty of time for discussion. I want to take each of these 5 principles, and I want to give you first why this is a really central idea in the Catholic social tradition. So for Catholics, like why this is really important. But then also talk about a couple applications where regardless of what religion you're a part of, these are interesting questions that we're wrestling with socially right now, and this is why this topic would be relevant. I'll kind of run through the 5 and give you my spin on it, and then we're going to open it up for broader conversation. And one of the questions I'll ask you guys is, which of these really resonates with you? Are there any you think, like, actually, I wouldn't include that in my vision of the good life? And that will provide us some great fodder for discussion. So let's start with human dignity. We had Cardinal Pierre, who's the Pope's ambassador to the United States, on our campus at Notre Dame in the fall, and he's 80 years old and really lovely, and I don't think spends a ton of time on his smartphone. But I was talking to him about this Delta framework, and we laid out all 5 for him at breakfast, and he's French, and he just points at the handout I'd given him, and he just goes, dignity, 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 dignity. The only one that really matters is dignity. And his reasoning behind this is that concern for human dignity is really the bedrock of what Catholic ethics means for our broader pluralistic society. In the Catholic tradition, in the Christian tradition, we believe that human dignity arises because we're made in the image and likeness of God. Your dignity, your value in the world has nothing to do with how productive you are, how fast you can solve math problems, how quickly you can create and post internet memes, or do any of the things that AI is now really good at. Your dignity does not depend on your ability to compete with software to do those things. Being made in the image and likeness of God, that alone gives you infinite dignity. One of the biggest challenges I think Christian theologians and philosophers are going to face in this coming era, and it's a challenge that I'm certain this new center is going to take up, is how do you help people understand what that means? Like what that really means to have that kind of dignity when we are constantly comparing ourselves to software. And in fact, the tech companies, the companies that are trying to sell and impress us with this software, want to show us all of the ways that the software is more powerful or more effective or better than a human mind. How do we defend our dignity in that debate? That's going to be very important work for centers like the one that was established here tonight. That's a really high-level theological idea, but it gets practical very quickly. One of the most incredible resources that the Catholic world has to offer the economy as we have debates about artificial intelligence is its conception of the dignity of work. In fact, the very first social encyclical in the Catholic tradition came out over 130 years ago. Pope Leo XIII was weighing in on the Industrial Revolution and the dehumanizing forms of labor that people were put through as we switched to an industrial economy. Pope Leo XIII set out this teaching called the dignity of work, which has 2 components. One, work is essential to a good life. Work is how we contribute to the common good, how we become in society with other human beings. It's nothing more, nothing less than that. Adam had a job in the Garden of Eden. I'd always ask my students if they knew what it was, but I won't put you guys on the spot. He was a zoologist. God told him he needed to name all the animals. He had a job even before the fall. There was work that had to be done. Work is part of what it means for us to flourish. That's the first component of the teaching. The second component is that some forms of work are humanizing and others are deeply dehumanizing. These 2 teachings are never going to be more relevant than they are in this debate about what it means for us to make this rocky transition to an economy powered by artificial intelligence. There's a major debate happening right now in my country about whether or not, if large swaths of the white-collar workforce are wiped out or replaced by artificial intelligence, we should switch to a system of universal basic income, or actually we just assume that a generation of human beings won't have work. They'll pay them a living stipend and they won't need to work, and whether that in fact be good for them. I think the Catholic Church is going to weigh in and say human beings are not meant to feel socially irrelevant. Human beings need access to meaningful ways of engaging in civil society, and if we are going to transition to this economy, we have to make sure that everyone has access to that type of work. Likewise, there are forms of work that we have used to build AI that are dehumanizing. Asking somebody in Kenya or Venezuela to look at disturbing images 16 hours a day and to label them so that we can use them in training models for artificial intelligence is a dehumanizing thing to ask someone to do. That is not a form of work that upholds the dignity of a human person. As we think about what goes into building these AIs, the Catholic world and the Christian world is going to remind people that there are limits to what we can ask humans to do in the service of this technological advancement. And that's going to raise, again, profound ethical and political questions. So that's dignity. I'll go faster, I promise, with the others, but to honor Cardinal Pierre, dignity, 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 we've got to stay focused on that. Embodiment. A distinctive aspect of Christian theology is this idea that our vulnerable, finite bodies are so beautiful and so valuable that God himself was willing to take one on. That God himself was willing to be born into a family, into a particular place, a particular time in history, to become embodied and to live out a life in that finite body, and that is a very meaningful aspect of our lives. I think many of us realize, those of us who've grown up in the era of the internet and social media, that we just kind of woke up one day and realized we were living very disembodied lives. Like suddenly, oh my gosh, all of your friends are friends on social media. They're not people that you ever breathe on or with anymore. The COVID certainly exacerbated that phenomenon. We realized that there's a sense of placelessness in our lives. Vicki has done extraordinary work on transhumanism. And we realize that there are philosophical schools of thought that are now telling people we should want to transcend our bodies, that we should want to somehow beat death. There are companies that are exploring options of taking all of your data and creating avatars of you that your loved ones can interact with after you die so that they don't have to mourn your death of your body because they'll still have a facsimile of you as an artificial intelligence. The church is going to have a whole lot to say about the disembodiment that comes with this major advance in digital technology. Some aspects of AI we are absolutely going to celebrate. I think in particular, the Christian tradition, the Catholic social tradition, celebrates forms of healing. And we saw with Google's DeepMind project several years ago, uses of AI that help us make incredible advances in protein folding and in drug discovery that could provide new treatments for Alzheimer's disease, for cancer, any number of scourges that end people's lives prematurely or cause suffering. We are going to welcome those discoveries. But we are absolutely going to resist a digital culture that denigrates the importance of our embodied lives and that tries to sell people on the fiction that they just are data and that their bodies and embodied lives are irrelevant. Love. The dominant principle in technology ethics right now tends to be utilitarianism. If you're going to take a course in tech ethics at most major universities right now, the first thing that you're going to learn is that ethics is a matter of optimization and trade-offs. It's trying to get the optimal social result out of some complicated trade-offs. In the Jewish and Christian tradition, ethics is not a matter of impersonal optimization. The very core of ethics is the greatest commandment, which comes through the Jewish tradition, through Deuteronomy and Leviticus, and says the bedrock ethical principle that you should live your life by is that you should love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength, and that you should love your neighbor as another self. The love ethic was absent in our development of social media. There were promises early in the era of Facebook and Instagram that the dawn of social media would cause us to connect with other people across differences in the globe. We do see that we're connected with people. I watch TikToks of people I've never met, and I know things about their kids because I'm served these videos constantly on social media. I know things about them, but I don't love them. And in fact, if social media has done anything to our politics, it's made it far more bitter and resentful and loveless than it was before we introduced this very powerful media into our society. Now we are going to supercharge social media with all of its vices and its ills with artificial intelligence. We're not even going to have humans creating hateful speech at the other end of the social media train anymore, but it will be powerful AIs that are capable of interfering in human social interactions. I think this is going to be a tremendous provocation for Catholic institutions and for the Christian world to think we think that these forms of interaction and sociality are unethical. Another really practical dimension of this is thinking, and I know this has been a major topic in your country, thinking about what appropriate age restrictions we need to introduce for social media and artificial intelligence for generations of human beings that are still learning how to care for and be in relationship with other human beings. A kind of love-first approach to AI and to technology ethics is probably going to weigh in pretty hard on having appropriate guardrails for people who are learning emotional and social intelligence, interacting with these powerful forms of AI that might distort that formation. Transcendence, this is the one that like the theologians love and the audience members always their eyes glaze over when I get to this one. You know, a major part of the Christian and Catholic social tradition is that there is objective truth and goodness and beauty in the world that's independent of our minds. It's just given to us to enjoy. And sometimes learning how to appreciate it requires great discipline. We are now witnessing the transition from internet search to AI search, from typing in a Google query where you get 10 different web pages that all have their flaws, but you just kind of pick from this menu of different opinions, to one single answer that's delivered to you by your artificial intelligence about a question that you pose. The AI does not have the capacity to apprehend objective truth. The way that it works, it's the same way Google works, but just more powerfully. It is designed for salience. It's designed to make you, the user, happy with the result that it has put in front of you. Relevance and salience are not the same thing as truth. And we're starting to realize this. If you've ever had an interaction with a hyper-sycophantic AI, you know this right away. I've been writing this book about the parable of the Good Samaritan, and a few weeks ago, I was looking up passages from Thomas Aquinas to try to include in a chapter in the book, and I was asking the AI, I was asking Gemini, a kind of ill-formed question about Thomas Aquinas. And Gemini wanted so badly to make me happy and to find a good passage for my book so that I could move on. So it just started hallucinating Summa passages and feeding them to me. And luckily, I have 20 years of philosophy education, so I knew to check them against the text and realized, like, oh my gosh, AI, Gemini, you're making this up, stop it. But there are plenty of other humans coming down the pike, plenty of students that we are going to educate at our universities whose primary mode of inquiry is going to be talking to artificial intelligence and are not going to have that sensibility to test or push back against answers that are easy or convenient. That is a civilizational challenge that we are facing, and it's one that's going to be acute with this transitional generation. How do we inculcate in people and remind people to love the truth itself, that it's still out there, that there's something different than the answer that the AI might be giving you? That's going to be a topic that I think is going to be a source of passionate focus for those of us that come from these Christian traditions. Finally, agency. A lot of people made a lot of money off of the internet and social media revolutions. And the primary business model for major tech companies, major consumer technology companies in the last 25 years is monetizing your attention. So your eyeballs were the product. Every minute that you spend looking at Instagram or YouTube or Facebook is money that companies make by selling advertisements or selling subscriptions to their products. Your attention is the product. And it's going to continue to be that way in the era of AI. ChatGPT is already serving up ads, which is going to be really weird. But there's a new economic model developing, and this is why $1 trillion of the US economy is flooded into this. This is the promise of agentic AI. So the promise of software that you will pay to make decisions on your behalf. And there are really simple versions of agentic AI that you probably don't even realize you're already accessing. So if you have a subscription to Waze or Google Maps, artificial intelligence is already helping you optimize your driving routes. It's helping you avoid police officers and traffic stops. And I'm going to pay for that. I'm 100%. I want the most optimal driving AI I could possibly get. It's already planning your trips. I'm planning a vacation in Europe in May, and I used Gemini to help design my itinerary in Denmark, and I'm super happy to pay for that service if it gets me really good hotel rates. But there are some decisions that we should not outsource to an artificial agent. And figuring out where we are going to draw those lines, that we're already realizing is going to be one of the biggest and gnarliest ethical questions that we are immediately facing. We, this generation of human beings that are trying to figure out how to use this. Some of them are personal. I'm a college professor. At the risk of oversharing, I hate grading student papers. I hate it. I hate it. It's like my least favorite part of my job. Some of my students are using AI to write their papers. Can I use Gemini to grade and give comments on student papers in a course called God and the Good Life? What's the answer to that question? Every college professor I know is ripping their hair out about this. I think, and my conviction is that when you portray yourself as somebody's professor, especially their philosophy professor, the person that's helping them care for their souls, you've taken on a certain obligation to authentically interact with their thinking, to join your human thinking with their thinking, which means just plugging 150 essays into Gemini and producing wooden comments is an abnegation of your responsibility to them. But it's a gray area. It's a complicated local ethical issue, another personal institutional singularity that we are wrestling with at my university right now. That's what it feels like in my personal life. At a really high level, if you followed the news in the last 2 weeks, there is a major debate erupting about how very powerful frontier models could be used in military applications, and in particular in domestic surveillance and in lethal drones that might be used in conflict. My country has decided that powerful models should be used in those applications, and in fact, they've been having just serious disputes with the major tech firms about whether or not the technology companies are allowed to put any conscience-based guardrails on their technology. As this issue explodes, it cries out for the Catholic world to update its teachings on just and unjust wars to handle the possibility of wars being persecuted with artificial intelligence. That is a topic that every single Catholic university now needs to be thinking and writing about, because we do not have an ethics of warfare with powerful artificial intelligence. We just have never developed it yet. We have to do it. We are going to write those moral codes, and they're not going to be easy. Nothing about these questions are easy. They require really thoughtful discernment to figure it out. But this is happening under our watch. This is a final message I want to leave you with. One of our focus group members, who's a professor at a Catholic institution in the United States, not Notre Dame, he put this, I thought, in a really succinct way that stuck with me. There is no way we are going to slow down this technology. We might have had a brief glimmer of hope years ago that maybe every world government would join forces and agree to a moratorium on developing these powerful models. That possibility is now out the window. We are not going to be able to slow down the development of this technology. The thing that we can do, the thing that late Pope Francis was urging us to do, is speed up the conversation about these issues. I'm so glad that the University of Notre Dame, Australia, is establishing this center and has the fantastic Institute for Ethics and Society to play one role in helping speed up and facilitate these conversations here in Australia. And I'm very excited about the prospect of Catholic institutions across the world, Louvain in Europe, Católica in Santiago, Chile, the University of Notre Dame in Santa Clara and Georgetown, joining forces to try to globally speed up and facilitate this conversation, because this is, I think, our very best hope of casting that positive vision of a good life now that we're in the midst of this unprecedented technology. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, or did I burn all the clock?
No. Thank you so much, Megan, for that absolutely wonderful talk. And we do have time for questions. I think there'll be a microphone. Yep. So I'll walk around with the microphone, and if you could raise your hands, or the person at the back will kindly come to you. So if you could raise your hand if you have a question for Megan.
Thank you. My name's Jack de Groot. Thank you very much for that wonderful, stimulating presentation. In recent days, we had Prime Minister Carney of Canada here repeat his Davos speech around the demise of the rules-based architecture, both in terms of international humanitarian law, which we're now seeing in current conflicts, and particularly in trade. So I'm wondering what the real appetite is globally for the conversation you're talking about of both virtues ethics as well as rules-based ethics, when so many of our major pieces of architecture for moral, political and economic decision-making are actually at the place of rupture.
And this is a fantastic question. I was at a meeting in Silicon Valley right before Christmas. We were doing a dinner where we'd gathered people from different backgrounds, people who are working in big tech, people who are working at universities, to have a conversation about these different ethical themes. And a very well-meaning, thoughtful person at the dinner, about halfway through, raised his hand and he's like, this is nice. So you kind of patted me on the head, like, this is great. You do realize that there are only 300 to 400 people on planet Earth right now who matter, and none of them are at this dinner. And so, this is great, enjoy your dinner, but at the end of the day, the people that will determine what happens to the rest of humanity are a few hundred people that are building the frontier models at these major companies, and then a few hundred people who are perhaps working for the governments of China and the United States of America, who have the power to decide, how realpolitik plays out. And those are the folks that are going to determine what happens to the rest of us and our children. And so, if you're not capable of influencing them or changing their minds, good luck. And I appreciated the honesty with which this person raised their point, and I think it's a pretty common point in these debates right now. I'll say two things about this, and I've reflected on it quite a bit over the last few months. First, I think as a practical matter, they're wrong. At least from the company standpoint, this person worked alongside a big tech firm. It's not the case that only the developers matter, because they need a market for their products. From the corporate standpoint, Claude, OpenAI, Gemini, they need users. They need your eyeballs. They need you to pay subscription fees. They will go out of business if there are no users. And the really smart technology companies are aware that they are releasing their product into markets where people's values are deeply formed by their faith commitments. If you are going to do business in Kenya, in certain parts of Australia, in the United States of America, you're going to be selling your product to Christians whose vision of the good life and how they're going to use technology is formed by their faith commitments. And if they decide that your product is antithetical to their vision of the good life, they are not going to use it. And if enough people opt out or opt to your competitor, you're in big trouble. So they're wrong to ignore the users just as a practical matter. And likewise, for the case of democratic governments, they're wrong to ignore their voters from a practical matter because they will not maintain their power if they're not cognizant and in touch with the values of the people who vote for them. As an ethical matter, I think that Christians need to be a powerful rejoinder to this realpolitik idea about the global order that is, emanating particularly potently from my country right now, but we see in China and in other parts of the world. This is this idea that at the end of the day, ethics is irrelevant. The strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must, to quote Thucydides. It comes from, this is a problem that, by the way, that's as old as the world order is. So famously in the Peloponnesian War, the very powerful Athenian government decided they wanted the land of this really small island called Milos. And the Melians had always been very peaceful and ethical people. And the Athenians came in and basically said, we're going to slaughter all of your men and take all of your women and children as slaves, and we're going to take all of your land. And the Melians famously went back to the Athenians, and they're like, what did we ever do to you? Like, we've always been peace-loving, kind people. And the Athenians said, in this world, whoever has the most powerful navy decides what's good. The Beatitudes, the gospel of Christ, resists that vision of how power works in the world. If you read closely in the Christian tradition, if you reflect on the ethics of the Christian tradition, one of the major themes is people who think they are powerful are often not that powerful. And at the end, their power ends up being illusory and reversed. And that real power comes from justice, it comes from love, it comes from truth. It comes from something far deeper than the principalities that govern our current moment. And I think as we kind of face down this global crisis, here I speak as a Catholic, we can't let ourselves be deluded by that lie about realpolitik. We've got to believe in like a higher form of, higher logic of power that's really at the essence of our religious tradition. But again, it sounds nice, and then you go to that dinner in Silicon Valley, and they're like, oh, people said this to Jesus too, like, that's cute, there's a higher power. The Romans thought, like, show me, but, we did. But it's a great question, and this is one, is a deep, deep, deep skepticism that's coming from our current political order that I think is going to be one of the biggest challenges for Catholic institutions that are going to work in this space. God bless Pope Leo as he tries to be a prophetic voice in these debates.
Yeah, is that on? Yeah, hi there. Thank you. My name is Justine. I was just wondering, you mentioned the quasi kind of religious movements in Silicon Valley, and I'm not totally across Peter Thiel, but he is championing a kind of Christianity in this space as well.
Yes.
So I'm very excited by what you're talking about, but it seems like there's going to be Christianities that are weighing into this, and so I'd just love you to comment on that.
Oh my gosh, Justine. So if you haven't been following, Peter Thiel made gobs of money co-founding PayPal. He's frenemies with Elon Musk, a very big personality in Silicon Valley, and has rediscovered a kind of Christian faith. At least he wants to talk about it all the time. And he, right before Christmas, ended up just all over podcasts and the news for preaching that tech regulation was the Antichrist. And he didn't mean that in like a metaphorical way, but he was really trying to convince like Ezra Klein in the New York Times that the Antichrist prophesied in the book of Revelation in the Bible would come in the form of an AI regulator. And it's just like, it got really weird. And he is an example of in certain of these high-powered sectors that are really close to the origin of these frontier models right now, there's just a lot of weird ideas floating around, and there's plenty of curiosity about the spiritual and existential significance of what people are doing. I think, Justine, if I have one wish on planet Earth for the next 18 months, it's that next time the New York Times needs a spokesperson about what Christians think about some issue in artificial intelligence, they do not talk to Peter Thiel, but they talk to like any one of you or any one of the just extremely sensible, thoughtful Christians that have approached this topic. And I think one of the great deficits right now is that, the AI ethics is in the news every single day in my country right now. I bet it's the same in Australia. But many of the voices that represent faith-based perspectives are fringe, weird, extreme, like badly formed, theologically badly formed individuals. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, one of the things our universities can do is actually train up much better, thoughtful spokespeople to show that there are alternative ethical frameworks for thinking about these issues. If we have major unemployment next year, it would be phenomenal if there was a generation of really powerful Catholic voices that can speak about what the dignity of labor means in our tradition and why it's relevant to decisions that big companies are making. But we have to train up those voices now. Otherwise, Peter's going to take up all of the airtime. And then that's not just bad for Christians, that is bad for planet Earth, in my opinion. I hope he doesn't watch this video either. Or I do. I hope he does.
Hi. Hi, my name is Queen Guevara. I work for the Catholic Church, and one of the things I'm quite fascinated by in terms of AI, I've been grappling with this sort of tension I have with just a bit of a story. My mum is a director of nursing, and a lot of her life she's really struggled with her grammar. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden AI came up, and she's now fascinated by how it corrects her editing and allows her to communicate much more clearly. It gives her a platform to advocate for her ideas in boardrooms she may not normally find herself in. And on the other side, in my normal work with young people particularly, but also with thinking about how we do this thing called formation as an invitation from the Synod on Synodality.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how we work together with the intellectuals and the academics like yourself, but then the grassroots practitioners who are particularly interested in creating these communities that have the vision of dignity and empowerment and transcendence in mind, but are constantly battling the inequality that comes with access to these sorts of information. Yeah. How do we bridge that gap as we kind of sit in this space of grappling with all these various things to ensure that those on the margins have a place at the table when we're coming up with these visions for humanity?
Thank you so much. I think it's a fantastic point, and I don't have a quick answer to this. I have like a couple riffs, but I hope that your point, not to give Vicky more work, will be a provocation for this new institute, because I think one of the great possibilities of what the Catholic world and Catholic universities can do on these topics is stay very close to concerns of the poor, to concerns about actual formation and on the ground mobilizing and connecting with the vast network of Catholic charities and Catholic K through 12 schools and other Catholic institutions that are similarly concerned with these ethical questions. I would say one of the things that gives me the most hope, and I think is going to be most interesting about how the Catholic Church weighs in on these debates, is that we are a global church that has a special heart and focus on the poor. And right now there's a very little focus on the poor and the marginalized in discussions about what we're going to do with artificial intelligence. I was at a meeting in the fall, a meeting of various global leaders who are thinking about dimensions of AI ethics in the Catholic world. And there were some leaders from African countries that were there, or diplomats that work with leaders in African countries. And they were pointing out, and you'd have to fact check, I didn't fact check this is just something somebody shared at the meeting, but they suggested that there were 90 GPUs on the continent of Africa right now, so 90 of the powerful computer chips that you need to train and develop an AI model. There are like colleges and universities in North America that have more GPUs than the entire continent of Africa right now. If we think that this is the most transformative technology in these few centuries of human existence, and we also think that the United States and China are going to control all of the compute, all of the hardware that was required to develop and harness this technology, and we're going to completely write off entire continents on planet Earth from having access to the raw materials that you need to develop artificial intelligence, the Catholic Church is going to have a lot to say about the kinds of ethical questions that sort of perpetuating inequality raises. And I think we might be the only ones talking about this. I noticed when that topic came up, some of the folks from the tech companies just, fell strangely silent, and you could see them kind of clutching their GPUs even a little bit more closely. But in the Catholic world, we are going to prioritize not just optimizing our economy or optimizing the role of technology in our society, but ensuring that this transition is one that benefits the least of us, that benefits the poor. And we might be one of the only major institutions on planet Earth that still really believe that that's a core ethical commitment. So I think that means it's exciting to be thinking about these questions in the context of a Catholic institution. But how we actually do that and how we make a difference, oh my gosh, that's like the most difficult challenge I think we're going to face. Sorry, Stephen, that's all right.
Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And I know I have lots of questions for Megan that I'd love to ask her. And what I would invite everybody to do is to please join us for refreshments at the back of the room, just through the doors afterwards, for some drinks and a light bite to eat. And it just remains for us to thank Megan, to thank Professor Sullivan for her talk. Yes, please, clap. So, Megan, I've heard you speak before, so I came to this talk expecting to be a few things, certainly to be educated, to learn, to be entertained. You're a wonderful speaker, to laugh. What I was not quite expecting, but this is the sort of my strongest reaction, is really to be inspired, because what I sort of heard your talk at is a call to action and a call to reflection. And I really think that as a Catholic university, we're trying to heed that call, and that the founding of the Center for Technology and Human Futures that Vicky is going to lead is an attempt to heed that call. And so I felt inspired as a member of this university, but also a call to all people of goodwill not to sleep through this era and to reflect and to act appropriately. And so I feel like you've not only given a very moving articulation of that call, but also really profound resources for how to heed it in the Delta framework. So thank you for that and for the amazing work that you're doing at your university. And we have a small token of thanks to express our gratitude to you. So thank you, Megan. And thank you, everybody. Please join us now.